of like 5,000 companies, how often should I be calling them? And then do you break it all into like groups of 100 or groups of 1,000? What would I do with a group of like say 5,000 companies? How would I go about attacking that?
Yeah. So think of it as a funnel system. So rather than think, I'm going to call 100, I'm going to finish them, I'm going to call another 100, but think of it as a funnel where you're dumping fresh meat, I used to call it, new records into a funnel, and then you, through a process of calling, you identify the decision maker. In my books, I talk about what I call the 3 cycles of 3, which essentially is once you've identified the decision maker, that you're going to place 3 calls, 3 series of calls, 3 business days apart. So the first thing you're going to do is once you have the decision maker's name, is you're going to make 3 calls within a very short period of time. In the old days, those 3 calls would be made on the same day, morning, afternoon, and end of day, to try to get a hold of someone. Now you're going to make those calls over a day or 2, not over 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, but you're going to make 3 calls in a very quick succession. If you don't get a hold of them, you do not try to leave a message or anything. It's not until the 3rd dial of that sequence that if you do not speak to your decision maker, that you would then leave your voicemail, send an email, and then 3 business days later start the cycle again. 3 calls in a very short period of time. The goal is to interact with the decision maker. If you cannot interact with the decision maker on the first 2 calls, you're not leaving messages or anything. On the 3rd dial, if you don't speak to them, you leave the voicemail, you send the email. 3 business days later, you do it one more time. So what happens is, over a period of roughly 2 weeks, somebody that's in your A pool that you consider to be a high probability buyer and that you have identified as a top decision maker within that company is going to, you've made at least 9 dials. And statistically, Ed, and this number is going up, it takes a minimum of 9 to 12 dials before to call a certain person to get them to pick up the phone. So you're sort of on the lower end initially of how many dials it takes to have a reasonable expectation that someone will pick up the phone. And if you don't, you've left touches. You've left a voicemail and you've left email. So then at the end of the sequence, you have a decision to make. Now, if you think that somebody is, for whatever reason, a higher value target, then you can add a 4th sequence or a 5th sequence to the target before you let them go. But this is really, really, really important. As much as it is important to know who to call and how often to call and have the right messaging, I'm telling you, it's even more important to know when to stop calling and have a sense of the point of diminishing return. So if you think of your funnel system, you're dumping leads in one end of the funnel, Ed. You're working them in accordance with a plan. And then when you reach the point of diminishing returns, you let them go for a period of time. And my default was always 6 months. So you dump them in the funnel, you work the 3 cycles of 3 for roughly 2 weeks. Then you say, okay, I've made enough dials. They haven't picked up. They haven't responded. I've reached the point of diminishing returns. I will start my cycle again with them 6 months down the road. So what you're constantly doing is dumping new records, new high probability records into the funnel, working them, and then pushing them out. And there's obviously layers to that because you might make more attempts. There's things that you do in those first 2 calls that would add to your results. So on a simplified answer, you dump them in, you work the 3 cycles of 3, and then you push them off. Those that are worth the time, you would try again in 6 months. Dump them in, work them, point of diminishing returns, get rid of them. If they're worthwhile, call them again in 6 months. Am I answering your question there?
Yep.